A short story by Paul McCann. Weird Mr. White's not right. Mr. White was a reject of society. He never chose to be, but mental illness made sure that he was not made welcome around the community. He lived alone in a very small villa in a tenement village. All day he sat looking into space. No one ever knocked on his door except for the local doctor, who came once a week to give him a shot of this Lone Star sedative that kept him from the low valley of depression. Depending on his state of health, he would sometimes go for a stroll into the village. He never spoke to anyone, and no one ever spoke to him. He was so far away from the world. Often he thought mental illness is like living on the moon, and no one ever comes to visit but the fork and the spoon. And he would sit alone and eat every night. If only people could have understood that he wasn't as mad as they thought. In fact, Mr. White was a very gifted man who had powers of telepathy and clairvoyance. He often had thoughts like a magnet, and he could share those with animals and humans alike. He was even able to see visions of things that were to come, and he had the ability of healing people, if only he had the chance to use his gifts. They said Mr. White was quite unstable. They said he was possibly in the early stages of dementia. They said he was having delusions and hallucinations. They said he had no future at 32 years of age. He was avoided like a plague by those who considered themselves to be civilized and sane people. They thought it was better not to get involved. Sometimes Mr. White would go on the warpath. He purposely walked back and forward along his street to upset the other residents who pretended not to see him. He watched them and heard what they said about him behind their locked doors and closed curtains. He could see them. It was the story of Torment City on the interior TV inside his mind. He saw what they were thinking. Some of them reported him to the police. They said he was a peeping Tom. They said he even wandered into their homes and rummaged through their personal things. Mr. White seemed aware of the other residents in his street who had made reports about him. Mr. White had voiced some anger towards them. When the police arrived, Mr. White's behaviour seemed normal. The police advised Mr. White about a number of concerns. Mr. White's personal safety was at risk. There was another factor about Mr. White, however, that no one knew. He was not human. Mr. White was an alien. The doctors had never assessed his anatomy. If they had, they would have discovered that he had 3 hearts and an array of chemical changes happening within. Each night at sundown, Mr. White would walk out of doors and physically removed anyone or anything that stood in his way. His eyesight could not function in the darkness. He felt around with his arms outstretched. Everyone was dumbfounded the evening that a spaceship landed on his front lawn. That evening, strange-looking plants started growing in Mr. White's garden. The plant species and place of origin was a mystery. God only knows how they ever got to be and grow. There they spread around the garden bed and up the trunks of trees, as if just by chance. I walked past and found out what was going on. So now pay attention. Open your eyes and ears, and I'll tell you. At first I really thought my mind was gone, and I started to rub the sleep away from my eyes. There it was. All right, as large as life, walking from the spaceship landed on the front lawn. Out came these two-headed beings with green fingers and huge web-like feet. They made a squelching sound whenever they walked. Mr. White's window opened and he said, "Fancy a cup of tea?" With a wink and a grin and a nod of the head. Sure," I replied. In a matter of seconds, he brought me over a plate full of roses to chew. And then he said, "Our mission on Earth is to try and grow plants that never die." Mr. White has been part of that project. Suddenly, a strange purple mist fell down, and in a flash, they were gone. The spaceship blasted off, leaving a scorch mark all across my front lawn. I stood there speechless and stunned, thinking no one will ever believe me, so I just went back inside the house and poured myself another cup of tea. The end.